Good afternoon, and welcome to the Voice of Wisdom. With over 60 years of experience as an investment banker, entrepreneur, investment analyst, economist, and venture capitalist, Morty Davis is Wall Street and capitalism personified. The over 400 companies for which he has raised more than $3 billion over the years have created a countless number of jobs and exciting new products. Through the Voice of Wisdom, Mr. Davis explores, analyzes, and debates the most topical political, economic, and social issues facing our world today. Joining Mr. Davis today for a discussion on NATO and foreign policy is Len Carter. Len is an investment banker, business consultant, and private investor. And now, Mr. Davis and Mr. Carter.
Hello again. It's great to be back with you. It's Wednesday, 6:30, so we have the Morty Davis Voice of Wisdom back again. And it's my pleasure to join you all. I find you all so special. I don't think anybody has such an elite group of participants in their podcast. The messages you sent me, the criticisms, as bad as they might be sometimes, are very wise and get me wiser and give me more wisdom. So I really appreciate your involvement. You make you don't make the company, you make the podcast much better than it would be otherwise. It's always every great educator always says, I learn more from my participants, my students, my graduate students, my PhD writers, than I do from books or from other superior lecturers and doctors. So I can't thank you enough, and it's a pleasure to be back with you again. Before I start the program, I'm delighted to tell you I have Len Carter back again. He's a super participant because, like me, he graduated at the top of his class at Harvard Business School, and his wisdom is beyond. I was going to say beyond repair. It doesn't repair. Beyond comparison. He's just super. And he knows a lot about every single subject that comes up. So thank you, Len,
Thanks for having
joining us again. And before I launch our discussion, which I hope you got to see on the announcement of today's program, I always want to, if I can, because I love you all and I want you all to be happier than you are, and especially happy and successful. So that's why I wrote this book, Happiness Guaranteed or Your Misery Back. I hope you don't get your misery back. But I really feel that like it's been so gratifying for me to hear back from people who purchased the books, or even more so maybe people that I gifted the books to, hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of people at this juncture that all have praised it and tell me how much I appreciate it. It's 365 days, 365 pages. It's wisdom and advice and guidance on how to be happy in life. Every single day you get ideas and you get uplifted. And if you don't, call me directly and I'll try to give you a pep talk. But seriously, you should get a copy. And if you're not happy with it, I don't think you ever heard of an offer like this in all the advertising. You know, they're happy to, if you're not happy with the product, they say they're happy to return your purchase price. I'm not happy to return your purchase price. I'm even less happy that I'd have to give you what I promised, double your purchase price. But I'm so confident that you will love the book. So far, I haven't had one person that acquired the book or read the book, at least I haven't heard from anybody, that said they didn't think it was terrific, that every day it gives them a lift. Every day, every page has a humor and jokes in addition to the guidance and wisdom on how to be happy. So I don't know how you could get a better deal than that. But if you buy more than one book, I'm not giving you double your money, because that's the way for you to get rich. You buy 1,000 books and you get double what you paid for it, you'd make a nice score. So I like to start off by giving you some insights on how to be happy. And the main thing, as I keep telling you, is it's mind over matter. Your mind dictates your happiness. If you make your mind to be happy, to keep your mind happy, not to let it drift towards negative thoughts and depressing thoughts, and stay upbeat and stay relaxed. Every athlete, they'll tell you, they always say, stay loose, you do better. People think you got to be intense to do great. Even in business, the more relaxed you are, the more your mind works better, the less confrontational you become, and it improves your chances for not only for happiness, but real success. And also it helps enormously if somewhere relatively early in life, but it doesn't have to be, sometimes it comes later, you define an objective, a goal that you want to reach, something you want to achieve in your personal life and your career. That'll help enormously. Even when you go out to play tennis, which I do, or other sports, you have to visualize winning. You have to visualize winning each point and visualize how you're gonna carry out your plan. But always have a goal and work towards the goal. And if you do that, you don't have to be hard driven. You can be relaxed. It'll do better if you're relaxed, but stay focused. It's just like a drop of water on a rock. If that drop of water hits the same place on the rock consistently, it'll split the rock. If it's all over the place, it'll never split the rock. So stay focused, keep your eye on the ball and on the goal, and then act in accordance with that goal, with a positive mood, with a happy mood. Even when things go bad, try to smile, because it's hard to be depressed when you smile. If you start to make a sourpuss or you start to cry or something, that's going to bring on negative emotions. If you laugh and smile, that brings on positive emotions. Every actor, every actress will tell you when they have a part that is very depressing, they're supposed to cry. They actually feel bad, even though it's just a story that they're playing, an action that they're being paid for, and they should be happy because they're getting paid. When they express that depressed approach, that depressed attitude, they're going to feel down. And if they're in a happy play and laughing a lot, it's going to be very difficult for them not to have positive emotions. So bring on positive emotions, be happy, smile, thank the Lord, thank God that He gave you life. There's nothing more valuable than that. Enjoy the time and use the time effectively, not by, sinking your mind in what I call the toilet of negative thinking. So please do that for me if you won't do it for yourself. And you'll see how much better you do in your pursuit of happiness and your pursuit of all your goals and your on your way to real success. I promise you. And I'm going to stay on top of you to make sure that you stay upbeat so that you can perform at the maximum of your potential. And we all have way more potential than we ever dreamed of if we start focusing and working towards a goal. So God bless you. I hope these ideas that I convey to you, although they're very brief, and that's the reason I wrote a book with 365 pages, so you get more of the ideas and that they become reinforced as you read the book. Now, with further ado, let's get started on the issues of the day. Len, do you have any launching?
We've often in the weekly discussions touch upon similar themes, whether it's economic or foreign policy or government, role of government. But I was thinking that's because those issues are in the news and are very important issues all the time. So in the case here, where
I forgot to mention, don't watch the news.
Yeah.
That's
read the book instead of watching the news.
Right? Good news is never on the front page or even anywhere in the paper.
And it's never in the headlines.
Right.
So what has been in the headlines a lot recently is what's going on outside the U.S. in Europe and how the U.S. should react to that, deal with that, support, not support that, and in particular, its role in NATO. And so, by way of background, what's been going on is that let's start back in 2018. In 2018, at a NATO conference in Europe, then President Trump actually called for his generals to draw up plans to leave NATO, and it created quite a stir because it had never been contemplated before.
How long was it since NATO was established?
NATO was established after World War II, so it's
about 1945.
Yeah, I mean when we get to the debate on that in a few minutes, but it's been I would argue what's been responsible for the peace in Europe for the longest peace. Europe has had the longest peace in decades or hundreds of years, probably hundreds of years, the longest stretch of peace in hundreds of years. But back to what happened in 2018, it was quite stirring because it's never happened before. The Constitution requires the Senate to confirm treaties, but interestingly, it's in entering treaties. But interestingly, it's silent on withdrawing from treaties. So it wasn't clear whether Trump had that authority. The Constitution doesn't say he doesn't have the authority, doesn't say he does. So it's not entering a treaty, it was withdrawing from a treaty. So the generals thought it was a legal order. So they actually drew up plans in 2018 to withdraw from NATO. But I guess like a lot of reality events and season cliffhangers, at the very end, Trump decided not to do it.
But I believe the Constitution does say that only Congress has the authority to have the United States enter war.
So, yes, Congress has the right to declare war,
Right.
but with respect to NATO, there's no war. It's a treaty. So Congress would have no say in the treaty. The Senate, this Constitution specifically gives the Senate the authority to ratify treaties, but nothing said about withdrawing from treaties, which is why it was not clear to the generals, or not clear, crystal clear, the way it would be if it was specified in the Constitution. But nevertheless, the generals thought it was a legal order, and we're going to do it. And then at the very end, Trump decided not to.
So once we...
And the reason he wanted to do that was because as part of NATO, as part of 2% of countries' GDP under the NATO agreement is supposed to go to defense spending. And just as an interesting statistic, so in 2014, which was before Trump, in 2014, only 3 of 28 members were paying their fair share 2%.
So much for living up to the treaties.
Right. In 2023, which is after Trump, 11 of 31. So, and in 2024, 18 of 31. So, I guess a question was, did Trump's remarks, you could argue, and Trump's supporters would argue, that he got, 8 more members to pony up, because it went
more compliance.
It went from 3 to 11, and so was he bluffing? We don't know. If he wasn't,
but it worked.
It worked.
He got more compliance.
It worked. So, to his supporters, that's an achievement. And in fact, so that was 2018. Now, just recently, the issue again, it's only now 20. It was in 2023. It was only 11. So that's a third. Are still 2/3 are not paying their fair share. And Trump at a rally was talking about a meeting or a discussion he had with some world leader, which he didn't identify. And the country leader asked President Trump, well, if we didn't pay our 2%, would you still defend us as NATO members? And Trump said, well, if you're not paying your bills, because it's in business terms, if you're not paying your bills, then you could be evicted.
Yeah, not only will I defend you,
but
I will encourage Russia to.
Right. So now, so on top of that, to add a little salt to the wound, I will, in his words, encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want. So in 2024, 18 of 31 members are now paying their fair share. So just in the last short period of time,
more than half.
More members are coming to the table. Again, Trump supporters would argue it worked. It's when you are weak with people, they'll take advantage of you. The joke in Europe used to be, we get cheap energy from Russia, cheap labor from China, and cheap defense from the United States. So no more cheap labor from China, no more cheap Russia energy. And so you can imagine the fear that NATO members have when Trump is doing that. So that's I guess by way of background what's happening. So the question is, should the president make comments like that? A lot of detractors say it doesn't do well to make statements like that, to undermine an alliance, even if it's not going to happen. Just saying stuff like that is not something you want the president of the United States to do. And if the president is okay to say stuff like that, should the U.S. go further and withdraw from NATO? The one further interesting thing is that, and this just happened because I was wondering myself, because there's a Jim Sciutto from CNN wrote a book which is coming out next month.
Who is that?
Jim Sciutto. He's one of the CNN anchors.
Sciutto.
Yeah. Nothing
to do with guns.
No, Sciitt, Sciutto. So he said, so his book is called The Return of Great Powers, and he interviews different officials, former officials from the Trump administration and elsewhere. And one guy who served both in Trump and the Biden administrations at a high level, he says that if Trump defeats Biden in November, quote, the U.S. will be out of NATO. So is that a good thing or not a good thing? I was wondering myself if that's possible. Can the president unilaterally withdraw the United States from a treaty like NATO? And interestingly, I found out, I was just looking around, just last month, or in December, as part of another defense bill, I think, the Congress passed, as part of the bill, passed legislation that requires a supermajority of the Senate or a full act of Congress to pull the U.S. out of NATO, for the U.S. to leave NATO. So it's interesting because it was even before, they say it was that Congress had a premonition that if this could happen, they want to head it off at the pass, which I think was a good thing. You may not agree with that, but we'll discuss that shortly. But if Trump is reelected, he will not be able to, as president, unilaterally withdraw from NATO, as in light of this legislation that was just passed 2 months ago, because he's not going to get a supermajority of the Senate nor a majority of both houses, because virtually every representative and official in government, save for a few, support NATO. So if that's not to say that if Trump wants to diminish NATO diminish the U.S.'s role in NATO, he can't, because he it's not to say that he won't be able to do that, because he will. He can bring troops back. He can not participate in military exercises. There's things he can do to show or to be less involved. He can't withdraw from the treaty, so if one member were attacked, the U.S. would have the obligation to defend, but he can't withdraw.
He might be able to withdraw. He could use the Constitution itself. The Constitution clearly is interpreted at different times, different ways, depending on what the prevailing mood of the country or the political leadership decides. But the creators of the Constitution the authors of the Constitution, obviously felt that going to war was so important that it shouldn't be one man's decision, and it should be well thought out and a specific action to vote on that entry into the war. By doing treaties like the NATO, we've obligated ourselves to enter wars that otherwise we would never get the vote for, that Congress might not get the vote for. So by entering a treaty like NATO or any treaty that says if your country gets attacked, we will go to war for you, overcomes the instructions of the Constitution, which clearly says, to go to war, you have to get the.
Well, it doesn't say that you have to declare war. Only Congress can declare war.
Right.
But it doesn't say
if you
that it requires that you can defend. You can help defend.
Declare war, how do you go to war if you don't?
Same way we've done it since World War II. So easy.
That's illegal.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it happened. It happened in Korea. It happened in Vietnam. It happened in Afghanistan. It happened in Iraq.
Well, it's different if we're attacked. You would assume that you get an overwhelming support for that by Congress. So I don't know.
No, I would agree. I mean, it's interesting. Article 5 of NATO, which is one all for one for all, has been invoked one time since the NATO's been formed, and that was by the U.S. after 9/11 to go in when we went into Afghanistan. We invoked Article 5 to say we were attacked, and we need all of NATO to support us in our defense and attack back on Afghanistan. So the one time it was invoked, it was by the U.S.
Yeah, but which was not true in any event.
Well,
Afghanistan never attacked the United States.
I mean,
it was one individual.
That may be, but it is true that that's when Article 5 was invoked.
Okay.
And all the other countries.
The way the Constitution is used,
I would agree that it's possible. Yes, because what would happen is, let's say Poland gets attacked and invokes Article 5, and the president says that even though the Senate approved the treaty, and the Constitution says that the Senate has the ability to ratify treaties, it's conflicting with the other articles that say Congress is the only body that can declare war, and therefore this rule, this law that was just passed in 2023 that says that leaving NATO can only be done with a supermajority of the Senate or legislation by both houses of Congress, that law, they would argue, is unconstitutional because it goes against the article which says only Congress can declare war. And the argument would be that this legislation passed in December is unconstitutional. And so it would go to the Supreme Court to interpret whether that law is constitutional. And the arguments would be what you said, is that it conflicts with...
What law was introduced in December?
The one that says the U.S. cannot leave NATO without either a supermajority vote by the Senate or approval by both houses.
Who ruled that way? The Supreme Court?
No, the Congress passed the law.
Oh.
Now, the Supreme Court would be the ones to judge whether that's constitutional, because they decide whether laws are constitutional.
Right.
So if the president decided not to
Yeah.
support that, he would say it's against the Constitution. Yeah. The other people would say, no, but we have a law that says you can't leave NATO and we have to defend the treaty because we're in the treaty. And then it would go to the Supreme Court. Those are the two arguments.
But you can't override the Constitution, presumably.
Correct. But but the Constitution is an interpretation. And that's what the Supreme Court would do, is they would adjudicate whether or not this law is constitutional. I mean, I would say it is. You would say it's not.
Pretty straightforward. It can be clearer.
It's very clear that the Senate can ratify treaties. So why is that not clear? Treaty is clear.
The treaty can't override some basic statement, a basic instruction that the Constitution put forth.
I mean, it's not clear that it does.
It conflicts because we have to go to war.
It says only Congress can declare war. It doesn't say that the U.S. can't supply arms and whatever other munitions or people. That's not declaring war, because we've done that. We did it with every conflict since World War II.
That's different. We don't enter the war by supplying defense.
But we did that with Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, all these.
All wrong.
But that happened.
I know.
So that's what I mean. And
that's against the Monroe Doctrine. That's it.
Monroe Doctrine is not it's not legislation.
That's why we have this statement by many people today, especially what's his name, the cowboy, Ronald Reagan, who said, "Peace through strength." That if you have a big defense budget, which we do have, bigger than almost the whole world combined.
Yep.
So presumably we'd have peace all the time. We're in more wars than any other country in the world. It's not peace through strength. It's kind of like a bully who has all the resources and tools can manipulate everybody else, which we sort of have taken the view that we're in charge of the world. We decided to have the Arab Spring, which was, we thought we're going to bring democracy to the Middle East countries, to the Muslim countries, to the Arab countries. And, that's audacious. We could say we'd like to help make that come true, but we sort of set it up as an American policy. So we should stop getting involved where we're forced to go to war, notwithstanding the circumstances at the time. So if Poland got attacked and we were unhappy with the way Poland acted, we're still compelled to go to war to defend. To me, that doesn't make sense. I don't think NATO serves a useful purpose for the United States.
So here's my argument why I agree. Here's what, I'll read you what President Biden said. So last week, Biden came out saying that Trump was the first president who bowed down to a Russian dictator, which Biden said was dumb, shameful, dangerous, and un-American. Add that criticism to a chorus of alarm from NATO and European officials after Trump's comments and in the midst of House Republicans' blockage of additional aid for Ukraine. So why I agree with that is that, first of all, if you look at the history, that the period of history since NATO was formed is the longest period of peace in centuries. Centuries. is the longest period of European peace in centuries since NATO was established.
How do you define peace? Great Britain's been in wars.
No, since
Yeah.
NATO.
Great Britain has been
No,
in wars.
there haven't been world wars in Europe. There haven't been wars in Europe. I mean, there's
not
been.
world wars, but they joined the United States every time the United States.
I know,
went
but
into Iraq
that's not what I'm
or-
saying. I'm saying it's kept peace in Europe. There hasn't been. There hasn't been a European war since NATO has been formed. That's a fact.
There wasn't a war in Bosnia.
You want to call that a European war?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think every European
Do
wasn't.
you think that's a Brooklyn war? Or
I mean, that was a war against
That's a European war.
against but not involving every country the way in world wars past and in centuries past you had wars. I mean, and even if it is, all right, maybe I misstated that there weren't wars, but certainly at the what you would constitute levels of peace, relatively, it's been the most peaceful period. That doesn't mean there weren't conflicts. Okay, granted, but it does mean on a relative basis, it's been the longest period of relative peace in centuries. Secondly,
not for the United States, it hasn't been.
in Europe, certainly.
No, in wars.
I'm not talking about wars. I'm talking about European peace, not
So
world.
that takes care of Europe. But for most of the world,
That may be true, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about
it's not.
NATO.
You don't need NATO because no other part of the world has been in wars more than the United States, which is part of NATO. There's no other country that's been in as many wars since 1945.
That may be, but we're talking about peace in Europe before and after NATO. That's what we're talking about.
Okay, and
That's my argument.
I'm saying it's not NATO that produced that because it's been true for the rest
But
of the world.
I'm saying if you look at no, because there have been bigger conflicts outside of Europe in outside of Europe, namely in Asia, in the Mideast, everywhere else. So that supports my argument that
but the United States being part of NATO didn't prevent us from being in these wars.
no, but it prevented
Yeah,
European
but
conflict.
It protected the Europeans, but it didn't protect the United States. The United States has been in more wars.
But it protected the United States from having to get involved. You don't think the U.S. would get involved if there's a war in Europe? Of course it would.
Of course it would.
Right. So what's good for Europe was good for the
It
U.S.
gets involved if there's a
Absolutely. That may be. But that's, again, not the issue of Europe.
Afghanistan,
Right. But we're talking about...
Vietnam,
Absolutely. But we're talking about European
No, but I'm talking
peace.
about from the United States. I don't care about the whole world as much as I care about our country. And it hasn't done anything great for the United States.
I would say it does, because if it keeps peace in Europe, that's good for the U.S.
That's good for the U.S.
Yes, and also by having NATO, it prevents, I would argue, an arms race. If the U.S. were ever to leave NATO, and then all the European countries would have to worry much more about defending themselves in the event of a foreign attack, mainly from Russia. What's that going to do? It's going to create an arms race. All these European countries are going to want to develop nuclear weapons.
Peace in the world. No country would have enough
I don't think
defense
so.
equipment to go to war.
I don't think so.
We got to starve the defense.
I think it would create an arms
It's
race.
called defense budget, but it's not defense; it's offense.
You don't think that European countries would want to develop more arms, more nuclear weapons, if they knew that the U.S. wasn't going to defend them?
Maybe.
I don't think that's good for the world.
What we do isn't good for the world, and we're doing it. we're the biggest arms race. When the Soviet Union fell apart, we said, "Oh my God, this is great. Defense spending will go way down. We'll get a big dividend," and it never happened. It's gone straight up. Eisenhower, who I thought was a weak president because nothing exciting he wasn't involved in, and wasn't to be a hero like Roosevelt or Truman or to be a real presidential hero like Lincoln, you have had, and Washington, you have had to be part of a war. And Eisenhower was a hero, not as president, as a general, but once he was president, in 8 years, he was not involved in starting any wars against anybody. And it's a tribute to them. And here's a guy who was a general who the inclination would be, he'd be fastest to pick up a weapon and go to war, as what we have a sense that generals generally do. He didn't, but he warned against, and he spent a lot of time at the end of his 8 years preaching against the
military-industrial complex. Yep.
Index.
Complex. Yep.
And military-industrial complex. And since then, we've been, because of this peace through strength, we've had less peace than any other country in the world. Less peace. I don't know any other country that's been involved in more wars than the U.S. Either starting them or participating with them or encouraging them. I don't know what tell me why we were.
But that's an argument. That's an argument not to do stuff.
Tell me, despite NATO, why we were in a kind of world war for the United States and Vietnam, where we lost.
Shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
But that's
Korea.
The opposite argument. The argument for NATO goes against what you're saying, because the fact that there haven't been those conflicts, like there hasn't been a Vietnam in Europe, there hasn't been an Afghanistan in Europe, there hasn't been a Korea in Europe. That's an argument to support NATO.
That's an illusion that we're staying out of trouble because
it's not an illusion. It happened.
Yeah, but it's only with respect to Europe.
That's why you want to keep NATO, so that you don't have things like Afghanistan and Korea and Vietnam in Europe.
That's really what it was meant to be, that keeps peace amongst the nations of the world. Not to carve out
as they say with that, good luck with that.
Well, that's what we should have.
But that requires the cooperation and buy-in from bad guys.
That takes leadership from a country like the United States.
Do you believe that there are bad guys in the world? If you believe that there are no bad guys in the world and that everyone follows the rules, then you're right. Then you could outlaw war and you could do all this stuff, and the UN would be all great. But unfortunately, there are bad guys in the world that don't follow the rules.
If you want to define bad guys as the country that destroyed the most people, there's nobody worse than the United States bad guys. We're the only one in the history of the world that used an atomic bomb to kill civilians. What's worse than that? As a bad guy. We define bad guys that does anything that the United States doesn't like, and the good guys are the ones that do things that are terrible. So,
do you think that the United States definition of bad guys, other than themselves, is accurate? Are there bad guys? Putting the U.S. aside, all right. So, what do you do with them?
I think human beings are.
So, what do you do with them?
You organize.
But they won't listen.
You've never tried it. The United States never took a leadership role to try to change the world. we give money to the UN without influencing its policies.
But I don't think you're going to get so. What would be the plan to get North Korea to behave, to get Russia to behave, to get any other aggressor to behave?
If you get most of the world signed up and explain,
Just
the
to explain,
world,
and they say they,
no, that
or else
you're
what?
young,
Or else what?
You're young people who have a future.
You think Putin cares about his young people? You know how many young Russians have been killed in the last 2 years?
With all that, but Putin hasn't done as much damage in the world as the United States has. As bad as he is. He kills his own people that rebel against him, but he didn't do Vietnam, he didn't do Afghanistan, he didn't do Korea. No, there's no other country in the world that has done. We're so righteous that whatever we do, because we're a country under God, so God praises everything we do. You know, that's an arrogant attitude that what we do is okay and always right. And whatever some other country does, especially if it's communist or socialist, that's terrible. You know. Anyway, I think we've abused it sufficiently.
So let me ask this. This is an interesting quote from Putin on the world stage, U.S. presidents, because we know he didn't like Hillary, and I don't know. He seemed to be friendly with Trump, but who knows what he really thought. So he came out and said that Biden would be better for Russia than Trump as president because he's a more experienced person, he's predictable, he's a politician of an old formation. That was his quote. Now, so does that mean that what's better for Russia is worse for the U.S., right? Because if Putin likes it, then how can we like it? Why is that? Does this mean that Putin really thinks Trump would be better for the U.S. because he really wants what's better for Russia? So if he says I want Biden and that gets Biden elected, does that mean he really wanted Trump because he doesn't want to support the candidate that he doesn't really want?
I don't know the machinations of his mind.
Who do you think would be better for Putin, Trump or Biden?
I suspect, off the top of my head, Trump would be better. But anybody who's as volatile and has no principles that dictate his behavior, you never know. He could turn instantly against, as he has, against his closest supporters. So maybe Putin is right. Maybe Biden provides more stability for the world.
Right. Although it's a puzzle because on one hand, if Trump does what he says, which is try to end the war in a day, I think one of the things he would do is not support Ukraine from a military point of view and try to negotiate a deal, because everything to Trump's a deal. So he would sit down with Putin, not with Ukraine, but sit down with Putin and say, all right, we'll give you this piece if you go away. A negotiation, a deal. I'll give you this, you give me that. Transaction. And I think he would then use the withholding of arms and support of Ukraine to get Ukraine to go along with that. So if that's the case, if you believe that, then I'd say you're right. Putin would be better off with Trump, because Biden's very supportive of Ukraine, and that's not good for Russia. So that's why I'm puzzled that if that's the case, if Putin knows that Trump would just try to cut a deal with him, give him some of the country, then why is Putin saying Biden is better for Russia? That's what I don't understand. But I think you're right in terms of the element of uncertainty. Which I think is to Trump's almost, and can be to a president's advantage, because you never know, like, if they're going to do something crazy. And I think an example of that in history, I think, was Ronald Reagan in the 80s, when he spent huge amounts developing Star Wars. When that happened, I was thinking at the time, this is the craziest thing, because no scientist, no engineer, no one thought that this idea to put laser weapons in space, to laser beam whatever, this and that, was going to work. But Reagan was steadfast. This is going to work, and spent billions of dollars developing it. And at the time, the Soviet Union panicked because they didn't know if this was really a crazy person doing this. And what happened? They wound up basically spending themselves into oblivion, going bankrupt, trying to keep up with the massive defense spending to outdo the Star Wars thing, and they wound up imploding because of that. So that kind of, like, a little bit crazy on Reagan's part was brilliant. Now, I don't know if he really knew what he was doing, intentionally being like a little crazy man, or if he really was. But either way, it worked. And that's why with Trump, with the NATO, if he says, I'm going to let Russia do whatever the hell they want with you, you never quite know if he's really telling the truth. And that's why all these countries are stepping up and putting up their 2%.
I think if Trump were president, we wouldn't be in the war with in the Ukraine war,
because he would have prevented.
He would have accepted the terms that, what's his name, and rightfully, he would have negotiated a peace treaty, saying, I won't let Ukraine into NATO. That was no big deal. That was no brilliant decision, because it's not like we needed.
So why didn't he do that during his term?
What?
Why didn't he do that during his term?
It never came up as an issue.
Yeah, it did. I mean, Russia was saying, Russia invaded Crimea in 2014. So they knew that they wanted to take Ukraine back.
He felt it was appropriate. It was part of Russia.
No, but why didn't Trump do what you said?
He never articulated as he did before the Putin.
I don't know. Invading Crimea, I think, is pretty articulating it.
No, I didn't say it ever. He said, if you don't let...
No, but Russia invaded Crimea.
Putin said...
Why did Trump try to settle the peace then? When he was in office? You said if he were in office now, this never would have happened.
There was no outbreak of war.
But why didn't he try to settle it? I mean, you knew there was hostility.
It was settled. There was never a major war breakout.
No, but they invaded Crimea.
So
why didn't he try to create peace?
He thought it was the right thing, that Russia had a right to do that.
But why wouldn't he still strike a deal that says that NATO, that Ukraine won't be in NATO, to avoid any?
That wasn't the issue.
Yes, it was, because it was in 2014. There was still
the discussion of Ukraine joining
NATO.
NATO.
That's not true, because Bush. It was under Bush Jr. They were saying Ukraine will join NATO. Bush Bush Jr., when he was in office, had a speech, or there was a NATO conference or something where they were saying Ukraine will create a path for Ukraine to be in NATO. That's been going on a long time.
I know, but they never acted on it.
They never acted.
Ukraine never acted on it. So Russia had no reason to.
But Russia invaded Crimea.
So what?
So if
they're saying they were entitled to, we didn't go to war against Russia because of the invasion of Crimea, did we?
No.
But now with Ukraine, we did. We're the major funder of this war.
True, but I mean,
and we don't belong there. It's not our business to be there.
I guess that's not really what I'm talking about. What my point is, I'm not so sure I agree that if Trump were in office, that Russia wouldn't have invaded.
Putin gave us an opportunity. He said, if you guarantee that Ukraine will not be invited or permitted to join NATO, I will not attack. We never tested that. We never, it's like we can't wait to get into the next, what's the word, next, not fight, but, like between two gangs. Next, there's some good word, I can't think of it. It's like we're looking for the next fight. Where are we? Not only that, with the defense spending, with the bill that high, it doesn't even account for the money that we spend off budget. That's not in the budget. That adds to our deficit and increases the defense budget dramatically. The money that we give to for breakouts in different countries.
But when do you abide by the UN and when do you not? For example, you say Russia is entitled to Ukraine because it was part of Russia. However, when Russia...
I don't believe it's our business to be the policeman of the whole world.
So even if a country invades another sovereign country, let them do it.
It depends on if there's no reason at all, there's no connection at all. Like, I don't think we should defend Taiwan if China decides to take it because it was part of China. So that's not our.
So Ukraine was part of Russia, so they can have it back.
Yeah.
Even though the United Nations recognize the sovereignty of Ukraine. So in that case, you're saying we don't recognize the UN's decision. The UN recognized Ukraine as a sovereign nation, just like it recognized Israel as a sovereign nation.
They've done nothing.
So if that were the case...
Since they recognized Israel as a sovereign nation...
No, but what I'm saying...
They never stood up to defend Israel, even though it was attacked immediately as a sovereign nation.
That may be true, and that's not right. But I'm saying it's not right if the UN recognizes Ukraine, then the world should recognize Ukraine, and that an attack on Ukraine is an attack on a sovereign nation. If you start to say, well, we don't believe that the UN was right, then what's the purpose of abiding by any of what the UN says?
I don't believe that we should. I think it's the most corrupt.
But you said before that we should have the UN.
We should have a new UN, not this UN.
What's a new UN going to do?
the League of Nations that was supposedly going to do it.
Right, and so what would a new UN do that this UN didn't do?
You have to form a
It's going to be the same people, the same countries. What's it going to be different? How's it going to be different?
The United States came with its values and said only ones that could join are ones that make a commitment. There are no more wars. You can't be a member of the UN unless I wouldn't call it the UN.
Right.
You can't of the group that's going to protect the.
And then what happens if they don't? What happens? Just like they agree to human rights, and then they don't.
We put together as part of that group. We have a force, a military force.
So we say we're going to have a new UN 2.0, and only
with the military
provided by all the countries.
All the countries, that's right,
have to put up military.
Yeah.
So then, what happens?
The ones that make this commitment.
Right. So the price of admission is you have to make a commitment, and you have to be contributing militarily to enforce the commitment.
Right.
And what happens then if one of the countries not in the UN does something
if it starts a war,
right, then what happens?
The UN army cuts them off right away.
So the UN would come to the defense. So let's say the UN would come to the defense of the attacked nation.
Would halt the belligerent action of the attacking nation.
Okay, so
they're not taking a side.
But if we had the UN, so suppose we had this UN 2.0 when Russia invades Ukraine, what would happen? What would have happened? The UN 2.0 would come to the defense of Ukraine, or let Russia take over Ukraine?
I told you, unless there's a vital interest and it's unrelated and it's an attack on a nation.
But it was an attack on a nation.
No, I don't agree with that. I believe it was part of Russia, and they just wanted it back. And the same with Taiwan. I don't believe the United States has any business except the selfishness of the United States.
So what happens if Ukraine wanted to join United Nations 2.0? You won't let them because they're really part of Russia?
No, I wouldn't let them because I don't know that they have anything to offer. If they made a commitment.
But you just said anyone who
made a commitment.
Yeah, suppose they would.
Yeah, so then they could join.
And then if Russia attacked Ukraine, you would say the UN 2.0 should defend Ukraine.
Should stop the war. Yeah.
How do you stop the war? You have to defend the country.
You don't defend the country.
How do you stop
a war against Russia?
So you would go
against attacking.
Right. So you would have to defend that country.
I'm not defending Ukraine. It's not like NATO. I'm not defending any country that Russia attacks. I attack Russia because they're starting an illegal war. War is illegal. Now, if you start war,
so all these countries that are in there would have to attack Russia to stop their attack on Ukraine.
They would have to attack Russia. Nothing to do with protecting Ukraine.
No, they'd have to attack Russia for attacking Ukraine.
Not for attacking you, for starting a war.
That's attacking Ukraine.
Okay. It's not because of Ukraine.
I didn't say it was.
Okay, so I'm saying they're not taking a position what's right for Ukraine or Russia.
That's not what I said.
Okay, and it's not what I said either.
All right. All right, so we are out of time.
Already?
Yes, already.
We didn't even cover 10% of your agenda.
We really do, but we got the important points.
What else was on here that was timely?
I think most of it we actually did touch on why we're in so many wars, why this happens, why we get quagmired, why we should, how we can stop this, what should we do with Ukraine, how do we eliminate this whole thing. I think we actually touched on a lot of this.
Through peace, through strength, if we get any stronger, we'll be in wars every single day of the year. Because clearly, it's not the strength that keeps the world at peace. You have to start off recognizing that human beings have bad inclinations. And that's why anytime some nation wants to come up with some new torturous weapon, you'll never stop them. Because it's something that the whole world wants. You know, all of a sudden they say, well, we got to protect ourselves, so we're going to make a stronger weapon. You know, we got to move in the other direction. How we stop this from happening in the first place.
All right.
Well, I just want to see if there was anything. Incidentally, I don't know if you noticed, there was a survey judging the different presidents and where they stand. I don't know if it was New York Times, but it was some reputable organization. And rightly so, I think Lincoln was number one. I think Roosevelt was number two. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Number three was George Washington. I think number four might have been Teddy Roosevelt, and so on and so on. It turned out that Biden was number 14. I was somewhat taken aback because you can't tell from the current feeling.
Nor from some of our other guests on the podcast.
Right. But you can't tell from the overall feeling of Americans right now that Biden is such a great president, even though the economy is good, a lot of good things he's introduced. So I could see why he would be up there. But the one that came out last, who do you think came out last?
Donald J. Trump.
Trump. And it was interesting. Obama was number 10. So he was pretty high up. I don't know why he was so high up. I think what he did with healthcare put him on the map.
How did they? What were they like?
I don't know what criteria they used.
Peace or uniting I mean, Lincoln. I think
Lincoln didn't bring peace.
Yeah, no, but in terms of
values,
trying to bring a country together after the Civil War. Yeah.
Also eliminating slavery.
Right.
So it's values, but I took issue with Obama's weakness because he made a red line with Syria,
yep,
and said if you use poison gas or something, it'll be the end of you. We'll come after you.
Right.
Did nothing.
Yep.
Then he appointed
nominated
Supreme Court Justice.
Nominated
a Supreme Court Justice with 10 months left on his service as president, his tenure as president, and didn't even fight it, didn't make it an issue. That's a wimp. That's not, to me, a leader. So, but I think it's because
healthcare.
When you take a large portion of the, not a majority portion, but a large portion of the electorate, the African Americans and people that identify with them, he gets a strong endorsement, so he gets high up. I think Clinton was pretty high up. I didn't see the whole list, but what's his name? Obama was ahead of Ronald Reagan. Biden was ahead of Ronald Reagan. That can make a lot of conservatives or Republicans, because I think many Republicans would put Ronald Reagan as number one.
I mean, unless you could somehow have this ranking by some mutually agreed neutral group, which no one's going to agree to, because the Republicans are going to say they're just liberal. Of course, they said Trump was the last because they hate Trump.
Right.
And Democrats are going to say the opposite.
I put Eisenhower way up there now. While he was president, I thought he didn't do anything. There was no, unless something breaks out that's big, you don't get any credit for being a leader.
Or criticism, like COVID with Trump, or if something happens, some crisis happens, you're judged on how you handle that crisis. In Trump's case, that was a huge criticism of his handling that. It's what a lot of what cost him the election. But
there are issues here on this paper that you and our producer prepared that we didn't get to, but hopefully in the course of our lifetime, we'll deal with a lot of this.
There's always next Wednesday at 6:30.
Next Wednesday at 6:30. So God bless you.
It's like who said? They say it's what the Mets fans say. There's always next year. Is that it? Was that the
Brooklyn
Dodgers? Yeah, all right. It goes for the Mets too. Wait for next year.
Well, the Mets were never as bad. Although they were the first year because Casey Stengel, who was considered one of the great managers of all time, when he was manager of the Yankees, because he won maybe 3 World Series, a great record. And then when the Mets were set up, they recruited him. And in his first year, he had the worst record in the history of baseball.
It just shows you it has something to do with how good the players are.
Right. So it's the same with managers.
Yeah. So
the president.
there's always next year. There's always next Wednesday at 6:30.
Right. Anyway, God bless you all. I love you. I hope you have a great week. Every day of your life should be better than the day before. And remember, make up your mind to be happy. You're in control of your mind. And if you control your mind, you will be happy and successful. It'll bring all the dividends that you hope for and wish for. And don't get immersed in the negatives of life, because there are always negatives. We all have struggles. We all have disappointments. And you can't avoid that if you're part of the human race. But you're in control, so let you be in control of your feelings and make the changes necessary so you're not immersed in that depressed feeling and that downer. Anyway, God bless you all. I look forward to being with you next week and the week after and the week after that, and hopefully forever, or a little shorter forever. You deserve a break. So before it's forever, I'll leave you alone. Anyway, again, have a great week. Have a great every day of your life. And be happy no matter what. Bye.